The case of Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee monster. We don't need to exaggerate the crimes of serial killers to make them more shocking. They are terrifying enough on their own. But when it comes to Jeffrey Dahmer, the horror reaches a level that's hard to imagine. The case of the so-called Milwaukee Cannibal is particularly gruesome, not just because of the acts themselves, but also because of the darker details that even some reporters at the time chose to leave out of their stories. His story is not just that of a disturbed man, but a case that raises unsettling questions about humanity, neglect, and how far human depravity can go. This is a story about a discovery that changed everything. It all started on the night of Monday, July 22nd, 1991, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Police officers Robert Routh and Rolf Muller were finishing their shift when a man, Tracy Edwards, approached them, stumbling. This 32-year-old African-American man had handcuffs dangling from one wrist. He was disoriented and clearly scared. Between gasps for air, he explained that he had escaped from a man who tried to kill him. He asked the officers to go with him to the scene, an apartment in the Oxford Apartments building, number 924 North 25th Street. At first glance, the Oxford Apartments seemed like a simple but well-maintained complex. However, upon entering the building, the officers detected a stench so intense and strange that it made them frown immediately. Both were veterans with years of experience, and although they knew the smell of decomposition, this was different. Tracy Edwards led the officers to apartment 213, where a man lived whom all the neighbors called the weird white guy, Jeffrey Dahmer. When Dahmer opened the door, he looked calm, even confused, but showed no resistance in letting the officers in. However, what seemed like a minor issue quickly turned into a scene of horror. As one of the officers headed to the bedroom looking for the keys to unlock Edwards' handcuffs, he found something that chilled him to the bone: a drawer full of Polaroid photographs of dismembered bodies. Many of these images showed naked men in grotesque poses, decapitated or cut open. Instantly, the officer shouted to his partner, "Cuff him!" Dahmer tried to escape, but was quickly subdued by the officers. Upon searching the apartment, the officers made an even more terrifying discovery. Upon opening the refrigerator, they found a perfectly preserved human head. Officer Mueller screamed, a sound that echoed through the building and alerted the neighbors. But that was only the beginning. The apartment of horrors. The inspection of Dahmer's apartment revealed a true museum of horror. In addition to the human head in the refrigerator, the police found 3 more heads in plastic bags inside the top compartment of the refrigerator, a human heart and pieces of biceps stored, a 200-liter blue barrel full of decomposed body parts in a chemical liquid, 2 human skulls in a metal filing cabinet, along with jars containing male genitalia preserved in formaldehyde, several Polaroids showing the process of dismemberment, and grotesque poses of the victims. In total, the remains of 11 people were found in the apartment. Additionally, in the bedroom, there was a knife, the same one Dahmer had used to threaten Tracy Edwards, and a photo album full of disturbing images. In a computer box, more human skulls were found, while in the closet, there was a container with several decomposed hands and a penis. The discovery of the blue barrel was particularly shocking for the officers and forensic experts. The remains submerged in the chemical liquid were in an advanced state of decomposition, which explained the unbearable stench that had been alarming the neighbors for weeks. The killer's profile. When Jeffrey Dahmer was taken to the police station, he didn't fight back or seem surprised. In fact, he seemed relieved. As soon as he arrived, he confessed to killing 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. According to Dahmer, many of his victims were young gay men. He met at gay bars, bookstores, or bus stations. He would invite them to his apartment and offer them money to take erotic photos. He would then drug them, kill them, and then abuse their bodies. For Dahmer, the real fun began after death. He would have sex with their dead bodies, cut them up, and keep some of their body parts as trophies. He also experimented with their remains. He would cook and eat some organs, like the heart or biceps, and he tried to turn his victims into zombies by drilling holes in their skulls and injecting acid into their brains. Dahmer said that cannibalism was a way for him to feel like his victims were still a part of him, like they would never leave him. For someone so isolated and unable to form real connections, this was his twisted way of dealing with being alone. childhood, and the beginnings of horror. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His childhood, at first glance, seemed normal, but it was marked by emotional neglect and family instability. His mother, Joyce, suffered from mental health issues and was addicted to medication, while his father, Lionel, was a busy chemist who spent little time at home. From a young age, Dahmer showed a disturbing interest in dead animals. He collected the bodies of squirrels, cats, and other animals, and dissected them in the woods near his house. He was fascinated by preserving and studying their bones, something that began as scientific curiosity, but soon turned into darker obsessions. As a teenager, Dahmer realized he was gay, something he decided to keep secret due to the social stigma of the time. At the same time, he began to develop disturbing fantasies, combining sexual attraction with the desire for absolute control. At 18, these fantasies culminated in his first murder. The first victim, Stephen Hicks. On June 25, 1978, Dahmer picked up Stephen Hicks, an 18-year-old who was hitchhiking. He invited him to his house to drink beers and listen to music. According to Dahmer, they had a pleasant afternoon, but when Hicks tried to leave, something inside him snapped. He didn't want him to leave. He hit Hicks in the head with a weight, strangled him, and for the first time, experienced what it meant to have complete control over another person. Dahmer abused the body, dismembered it, and stored the remains in garbage bags. Then he scattered them in the woods near his house. Although he felt guilt and remorse, this first murder marked the beginning of a downward spiral. Over the next few years, Dahmer tried to stop his urges. He went to college and joined the army, but his addiction to alcohol and his dark desires remained. A decade of crimes. In 1987, Dahmer killed again. His victim was Stephen Tuomi, whom he met at a gay bar. He killed him in a motel and took his body home in a suitcase. In the years that followed, he developed a pattern. He would lure young gay men, drug them, kill them, and keep parts of their bodies. Dahmer also began to experiment on his victims. He tried to create living sex slaves through gruesome medical procedures. He even ate the flesh of some of his victims. The final days of a killer. As Dahmer got better at his twisted ways, his actions became even more gruesome. In 1991, his crimes reached their peak. It was in this year that Dahmer moved to the Oxford Apartments on North 25th Street and began what would be his most violent and horrific period. Now, he lived completely alone and had the privacy to take his fantasies to the extreme. In the Oxford Apartments, Dahmer didn't just kill and dismember his victims. He also became obsessed with documenting every step of his crimes. With a Polaroid camera, he photographed the men both before and after killing them. These pictures not only served as trophies, but they allowed him to relive the murders over and over again. One of Dahmer's victims, Ernest Miller, was one of the first to be cannibalized. As he later confessed, Dahmer was fascinated by Miller's biceps, which he decided to cook and eat. In his mind, this act wasn't just a way to satisfy a morbid curiosity, but an attempt to keep his victims with him forever. However, his life at the Oxford Apartments didn't go unnoticed by his neighbors. They often complained about the strange smell coming from his apartment, and Dahmer would tell them it was rotten meat or dead fish in his fish tank. He even once claimed that his freezer had stopped working, and the stench was a result of rotting food. Despite these excuses, no one suspected the truth. Dahmer's chilling routine. In his confession, Dahmer explained that his crimes followed a pattern. Finding his victims, Dahmer often went to gay bars, saunas, and bus stops looking for young men. He usually chose those who seemed vulnerable or needed money. The lure. He offered them money to pose for erotic photographs at his apartment. The drug. Once they were at his place, Dahmer would drug them with sleeping pills mixed into alcoholic drinks. The murder. When they were unconscious, he would strangle them or inject hydrochloric acid or boiling water into their brains. He was trying to turn them into obedient zombies, but it never worked. The mutilation. After killing them, he would cut up their bodies and keep the parts he was interested in, like heads, skulls, hands, and genitals. He boiled some of these parts to remove the flesh, while he stored others in his refrigerator or in jars with formaldehyde. Dahmer also experimented with rituals that he called artistic. For example, he was planning to build an altar in his apartment with the skulls and skeletons of his victims, decorated with black candles and dim lights. This altar, he believed, would be a place where he could feel power and control. The capture, the fall of a monster. Everything changed on July 22nd, 1991, when Dahmer tried to kill Tracy Edwards, a 32-year-old man who managed to escape from his apartment. Edwards ran through the streets with the handcuffs still dangling from one wrist until he found officers Robert Roth and Rolf Muller. When the police arrived at Dahmer's apartment, what they found was unimaginable. Photographs of corpses, human heads in the refrigerator, a barrel full of decomposing remains, and jars with preserved genitals. Dahmer offered no resistance, and at the police station, he began to confess everything. He detailed each murder with chilling precision, describing how he chose his victims, how he killed them, and what he did with their remains. During the interrogations, he seemed more concerned with being honest than with the consequences of his actions. The trial of the century. Jeffrey Dahmer's trial began on January 27, 1992, and quickly became a huge media event. The courtroom was packed with journalists, families of the victims, and people who were just curious. Dahmer was facing 15 murder charges, and there was strong evidence for each one. However, Dahmer's lawyers tried to argue that he was mentally ill and that his crimes were the result of a serious psychological disorder. The defense's psychiatrists said that Dahmer didn't kill for pleasure, but to satisfy a need to stop himself from being lonely. They said his cannibalism was a way of keeping his victims with him forever. On the other hand, the prosecutors said Dahmer was a cold and calculating psychopath who knew exactly what he was doing. They argued that his organized way of committing the crimes and his ability to hide them showed that he understood how serious his actions were. The most emotional moment of the trial came when the victims' families had a chance to speak. Rita Isbell, the sister of Errol Lindsay, confronted Dahmer with shouts of anger and helplessness. "I hate you. I hate you, Jeffrey. I hate you. I wish you could die." Dahmer, meanwhile, remained silent throughout the hearing, his head down and his face blank. In the end, he was found guilty of 15 murders and sentenced to 957 years in prison, which is the same as 15 life sentences served one after the other. Life in prison and his tragic end. Once at the Columbia Correctional Institution, a maximum security prison, Dahmer was placed in solitary confinement for his own protection from other inmates. However, he requested to be moved to the general prison population, stating he was willing to accept any risks. In prison, Dahmer exhibited strange behavior. He often made dark jokes about his crimes, molding his food to look like human body parts or saying he might bite the guards. These actions did not earn him any sympathy among his fellow inmates, many of whom sought revenge for his crimes. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer was attacked by Christopher Scarver, an inmate with schizophrenia, who beat him with a metal bar while they were doing cleaning duty. Dahmer died on the way to the hospital at the age of 34. Dahmer's legacy of horror. Jeffrey Dahmer is remembered as one of the most notorious serial killers in history, not just for the brutality of his crimes, but for the questions he raised about human nature. What leads a person to commit such terrible acts? Is it the result of a sick mind, or a combination of neglect, loneliness, and unfortunate circumstances? Despite the media attention, the books, and the documentaries, Dahmer remains an enigma. His actions seem to defy any attempt at understanding or empathy, leaving behind a legacy of horror that still lingers in our collective memory. Final reflection. Jeffrey Dahmer is a disturbing reminder of what can happen when a troubled mind goes unnoticed for too long. He was not only a murderer, but also a reflection of a society that failed to see the warning signs. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to get notified about more true crime content.